At 23:15 hours on January 14th, 1942, two British tugboats approached the harbor of Santa Isabel, Fernando Po, Vulcan, and Nuneaton. They carried 32 men, 11 commandos of the small-scale raiding force, 4 agents of the Special Operations Executive, 17 local recruits as tug crew. Their faces were blackened with cork. Their weapons were concealed. They wore no insignia, no identification, nothing that could prove British involvement. Ahead in the harbor lay 3 Axis ships. The Italian cargo liner Duchessa d'Aosta, 7,872 gross tons, 464 feet long, built in 1921, radio-equipped, carrying over 3 million pounds of strategic materials. 2 German vessels, the tug Licomba, the barge Babundi. All 3 ships were moored in neutral Spanish waters, Spanish colonial territory. International law forbade any military operations. Any attack would be an act of war against Spain. If Spain reacted, she could join the Axis. Gibraltar would be threatened. North Africa landings would be imperiled. The entire Mediterranean strategy could collapse. But the 3 ships had to be taken. They were reporting Allied convoy movements to German U-boats. They were preparing to run the blockade back to Europe. They carried materials Germany desperately needed: copper, asbestos, rubber. The cargo was irreplaceable. The intelligence threat was intolerable. The ships had to be seized or destroyed. And it had to be done in a way that allowed Britain to deny involvement completely. This is the story of Operation Postmaster, the neutral port heist, the mission where British commandos became pirates, where international law was deliberately violated, where ships were stolen from a sovereign harbor, where the risk was Spain joining the war, where the reward was 3 Axis ships and their cargo, where the entire operation had to look like anything except what it was: a carefully planned act of state-sponsored piracy that Churchill himself approved despite opposition from his own commanders. The narrative begins not at Fernando Po, but in London. In July 1940, when Prime Minister Winston Churchill created the Special Operations Executive, the directive was simple: set Europe ablaze, conduct sabotage, support resistance movements, execute operations too dirty, too dangerous, or too politically sensitive for conventional forces. The SOE would operate in the shadows, deniable, ruthless, effective. Among the units formed under SOE control was No. 62 Commando, later designated the small-scale raiding force, 55 men, elite, volunteers, trained in navigation, silent killing, hand-to-hand combat, explosives, amphibious assault. They specialized in raids behind enemy lines, small teams, high-risk missions, impossible objectives. The unit commander was Major Gustavus Henry March Phillips, 31 years old, educated at Charterhouse in Sandhurst, commissioned in the Royal Artillery, transferred to intelligence, recruited to SOE, charismatic, reckless, inspirational. His second in command was Captain Jeffrey Appleyard, 26 years old, Olympic skier, linguist, commando officer. Together they formed the core of a unit designed for missions conventional forces could not or would not execute. In August 1941, March Phillips and 4 men departed Poole. Dorset in a 65-ton Brixham trawler named Maid Honor. The vessel looked like a fishing boat. She was armed with machine guns and explosives. Her crew was trained for combat. Their mission was to sail to West Africa, search for German U-boat bases in Vichy French territories. The Admiralty had received reports that submarines were refueling in river estuaries along the African coast. March Phillips would investigate. Meanwhile, Appleyard and the remainder of the unit sailed on a troop ship. They rendezvoused, at Freetown, Sierra Leone. This became their base. Between August and December 1941, the small-scale raiding force searched the coast. They found no U-boat bases. The reports had been exaggerated, but SOE agents in the region identified a different target: 3 Axis ships stranded in Santa Isabel Harbor on the Spanish island of Fernando Po. The island sat 32 kilometers off the African coast, near the border of Nigeria and Cameroon, Spanish colonial possession, neutral territory. The ships had been there since June 1940. Italy had entered the war. Britain had blockaded the Mediterranean. The ships could not return home. They remained at Santa Isabel, waiting. The Italian ship Duchessa d'Aosta was the primary concern. She was equipped with a powerful radio transmitter. Intelligence indicated she was monitoring Allied naval traffic. When convoys departed Lagos, Nigeria, Duchessa d'Aosta reported their movements. German U-boats were positioned accordingly. Ships were sunk. The radio had to be silenced. The ship had to be captured or destroyed. Her cargo was also valuable. The manifest listed 1,360 tons of wool, 141 tons of hides and skins, 580 tons of tanning materials, 1,786 tons of copra, 243 tons of crude asbestos fiber, over 11 million ingots of electrolytic copper. The first page of the manifest was missing. The captain refused to provide details. Intelligence suspected arms or ammunition. The German tug Likomba and barge Bibundi were smaller but still problematic. They could be used to resupply U-boats. They could transport personnel. They had to be neutralized. In August 1941, WWII agent Leonard Guy submitted a plan. Seize Likomba, disable Duchessa d'Aosta. The Admiralty approved the concept on November 20th, 1941, but approval came with conditions. No proof of British involvement could remain. The operation had to be deniable. Planning began immediately. The mission would require 32 men, 4 SOE agents already on Fernando Po, 11 commandos from the small-scale raiding force, 17 local recruits to crew 2 tugboats. The tugs, Vulcan and Nuneaton, would be provided by the governor of Nigeria. The plan was straightforward. Approach Santa Isabel at night. Enter the harbor after the town generator shut down at 23:30 hours, plunging the area into darkness. Board the ships. Overpower the crews. Attach explosive charges to anchor chains. Blow the chains. Tow the ships to international waters. Arrange for a Royal Navy vessel to coincidentally discover them. Claim salvage rights. No British forces in Spanish waters. No violation of neutrality. Plausible deniability. The plan immediately encountered opposition. General Sir George Gifford, British General Officer commanding West Africa Command, refused to support the mission. He would not release the 17 local recruits needed to crew the tugs. He stated the operation would compromise unnamed plans he had in mind. He declared the raid would be seen as piracy. There would be repercussions. The Admiralty suspended the operation. The Foreign Office opposed it. The British Embassy in Madrid opposed it. Spain's neutrality was fragile. Antagonizing Spain could push her into the Axis. Gibraltar was vulnerable. The risk was enormous, but the ships remained a threat. So we pressed the case. The intelligence value of silencing Duchessa d'Aosta's radio was significant. The cargo was valuable. The psychological impact of seizing Axis ships from neutral waters would demonstrate British reach. The Foreign Office reconsidered. On January 6, 1942, authorization came. The operation could proceed, with one absolute condition: no tangible proof of British involvement. Suspicion was inevitable. Proof was unacceptable. Preparation accelerated. WWII agent Richard Lippett had already infiltrated Fernando Po. He obtained employment with John Holt and Company, a Liverpool shipping firm with offices on the island. His cover was perfect. He began reconnaissance. He observed Duchessa d'Aosta's crew. He learned their routines. On January 6, 1942, the Italian crew held a party aboard ship. Lippett attended disguised as a guest. He gathered intelligence, ship readiness, crew numbers, watch arrangements, guard positions. The information was forwarded to March Phillips. Lippett also noted that the Axis officers regularly accepted invitations to parties ashore. They enjoyed socializing. They drank heavily. A distraction could be arranged. On the night of the raid, a party would be held at the casino restaurant overlooking the harbor. The Italian officers from Duchessa d'Aosta would be invited. The German officers from Likomba. Free food, free alcohol, entertainment. The seating would position them with their backs to the harbor windows. They would see nothing. They would drink while their ships were stolen. On the morning of January 11th, 1942, the raiding force departed Lagos aboard Vulcan and Nuneaton, 32 men. They steamed west toward Fernando Po. En route, they practiced lowering full-butts, collapsible kayaks, boarding ships at sea. Captain Graham Hayes drilled the commandos. Timing was critical. The approach had to be precisely coordinated. The harbor had to be entered exactly when the lights went out. The ships had to be boarded quickly. The anchor chains had to be blown simultaneously. The tow had to begin immediately. Any delay increased risk of detection. On January 14th, the tugs approached Fernando Po. The plan called for entry at 23:15 and 23:30 hours. The town generator shut down at 23:30. Darkness would conceal their approach. But the raiders encountered an unexpected problem. Lagos and Fernando Po operated on different time zones. The tugs arrived early. They stopped 200 meters outside the harbor, concealed in darkness, waiting. The crews watched the lights of Santa Isabel. Minutes passed. The tension was unbearable. Finally, at 23:30 hours, the town went dark. The generator had shut down. March Phillips gave the order, "Go." Vulcan and Nuneaton entered Santa Isabel Harbor. No navigation lights, engines throttled low. The tugs approached the moored ships. Ashore, at the casino restaurant, 14 Axis officers were drinking heavily. 12 Italians from Duchessa d'Aosta, 2 Germans from Licomba. The party was in full swing. Lippitt had arranged everything. The food was excellent. The wine flowed freely. The officers were enjoying themselves. None noticed the lights go out. They were inside. Paraffin lamps provided illumination. They could see nothing through the windows. Their ships were being stolen while they drank. Aboard the tugs, boarding parties assembled, faces blackened, weapons ready. Vulcan, carrying March Phillips and Appleyard, headed for Duchessa d'Aosta. As they approached, a few men could be seen on the merchant vessel's aft deck. Watchmen. They shone a torch toward Vulcan. They seemed unconcerned. A tugboat approaching at night was not unusual. They did not raise an alarm. Vulcan came alongside. 11 commandos boarded, silent. Fast. They spread through the ship. Below decks, bridge, engine room. They collected prisoners. 29 crew members. Most were sleeping. They were seized without resistance. One group attached explosive charges to the anchor chains. The charges were set, ready to detonate. Simultaneously, Phobos paddled from Nuneaton toward Licomba and Baibundi. The 2 German vessels were moored together. Captain Hayes led the canoe team. They approached Baibundi. A watchman challenged them. Hayes replied in German, "The captain is returning aboard." The watchman accepted this. The canoeists boarded. The 2-man watch crew saw commandos with weapons. They jumped overboard and swam for shore. The commandos attached charges to Babundi's anchor chain. They moved to Licomba. The tug was unmanned except for watchmen. The commandos overpowered them quickly. Charges were attached. Everything was ready. At approximately 23:45 hours, all charges were detonated simultaneously. The explosions echoed across the harbor. The anchor chains parted. The ships were free. Nuneaton immediately began towing Licomba and Baibundi. Vulcan began towing Duchessa d'Aosta. The Italian liner displaced 7,872 tons. Vulcan strained. The tow moved slowly, but it moved. The explosions alerted the town. People gathered on the pier. They saw ships moving out of the harbor. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire at imagined aerial targets. The gunners thought the explosions were bombs. 6-inch coastal defense guns remained silent. No one realized ships were being stolen. The raiders towed their prizes toward the harbor entrance. 30 minutes had elapsed from entry to departure. No casualties, no significant resistance. The operation was succeeding, but problems emerged immediately. Vulcan's engines struggled with Duchessa d'Aosta's weight. The tow was painfully slow. Nuneaton was also underpowered for towing 2 vessels. Both tugs faced 12 hours of towing to reach international waters. Dawn would come in 6 hours. Spanish patrol boats would investigate. Discovery was probable. The raiders pushed the engines to maximum. The tugs strained. The tow continued. At the casino restaurant, drunk German and Italian officers finally realized something was wrong. Someone noticed the explosions. Someone looked out a window. Ships were missing from the harbor. The officers rushed to the docks. They found their vessels gone. Chaos erupted. The Italian captain stormed to the British consulate. He demanded his ship back. The British consul expressed surprise and confusion. What ship? The Italian captain became enraged. A fistfight broke out. Spanish authorities arrived. They questioned everyone. No one could prove British involvement. March. Phillips had dropped French caps in the harbor as he left. Free French. The Americans. Spanish rebels. Speculation ran wild. The British maintained innocence. Meanwhile, Vulcan and Nuneaton towed their prizes through the night. By dawn on January 15th, they were approaching international waters, but Nuneaton's engines were failing. The strain of towing 2 vessels was too much. The engines overheated. Power dropped. The tow slowed. Hayes signaled distress. The collier Eloran, in the area by coincidence, received the signal. Eloran contacted Lagos. A rescue tug was dispatched. By afternoon, Nuneaton was under tow herself. The operation was barely succeeding. Vulcan fared better. She maintained the tow despite mechanical difficulties. On January 16th, she reached the prearranged rendezvous point. HMS Violet, a Royal Navy corvette, was waiting. The official story unfolded. HMS Violet discovered 3 unidentified vessels at sea. No identification. No flags. Suspected prizes. Violet took them into custody. They would be escorted to Lagos. Salvage rights would be claimed. The Admiralty issued a statement. British naval vessels had intercepted ships in international waters. No British forces had entered Spanish territory. German accusations of piracy in Santa Isabel were false. The Admiralty had investigated. No British vessels were in the area. The statement was technically accurate. No British naval vessels had been in Spanish waters. Only tugboats manned by commandos without uniforms. The German reaction was predictable. Radio broadcasts accused Britain of piracy. The January 21st edition of Völkischer Beobachter published an article, British Denials. Admiralty lies on act of piracy. The Germans knew, but they could not prove it. No British uniforms had been found. No British equipment. The operation had been deniable. Spain protested to Britain. Britain expressed sympathy, but denied involvement. Mysterious raiders. Possibly Free French. Possibly anti-Phalangist rebels. Certainly not British forces. Spain could not prove otherwise. The matter faded. The captured ships were valuable prizes. Duchessa d'Aosta was sailed to Greenock, Scotland. She was renamed Empire Yukon and operated by Canadian Pacific for the Ministry of War Transport. She served throughout the war. In 1946, she was sold to Canada, renamed Pet Connie in 1947. She returned to Italian ownership in 1951 as Liu O. She was scrapped at La Spezia in 1952. Her radio, the primary intelligence threat, had been silenced on January 14, 1942. Lacombe was managed by Elder Dempster Lines, renamed Malakel in 1947, sold to Liberia in 1948. B. Bundy served as a harbor tug. The cargo from Duchessa d'Aosta entered Allied supply chains. Over 11 million ingots of electrolytic copper, thousands of tons of materials Germany needed desperately. The cargo loss hurt, but the intelligence loss hurt more. Duchessa d'Aosta's radio had been reporting convoy movements for months. U-boats had positioned accordingly. When the radio went silent, U-boat effectiveness in the region declined. Convoys passed unmolested. Ships survived that would have been sunk. The human cost of Operation Postmaster was minimal. No raiders killed. No raiders wounded. 29 Italian crew captured. German crew from Lacombe and Babundi captured. All became prisoners of war. They were treated according to Geneva Conventions. SOE agent Richard Lippert faced consequences. Spanish authorities on Fernando Po questioned him extensively. They suspected British involvement. They could not prove it. Lippert maintained his cover. He was a shipping company employee. He knew nothing about the raid. He had not funded the party. He had not assisted raiders. The Spanish released him, but they forbade him from leaving the island. Lippert was trapped. On March 1, 1942, Lippert escaped. He paddled away from Fernando Po in a canoe. He reached British territory after hours of paddling. He was debriefed. His information about Axis shipping and Spanish attitudes was valuable. He received commendations, but no public recognition. The operation remained classified. Awards for Operation Postmaster were distributed quietly. March Phillips received the Distinguished Service Order. Hayes received the Military Cross. Appleyard received a bar to his existing military cross. Lippert and Guise were appointed members of the Order of the British Empire. Private Anders Lassen, a Danish commando who was first aboard Duchessa d'Aosta, received recognition. He would later win the Victoria Cross posthumously in 1945. The strategic significance of Operation Postmaster extended beyond the three ships. The raid demonstrated SOE's capabilities. The organization could plan complex operations, execute them successfully, maintain deniability. At a time when Britain needed victories, Operation Postmaster provided one. It showed British forces could strike anywhere. No Axis installation was safe. Even neutral harbors offered no protection. The psychological impact was substantial. The raid also established precedent for future operations. Deniable missions, unconventional warfare, violations of international law when necessary. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, as SOE was sometimes called, proved its worth. Churchill backed the operation despite opposition from senior commanders. The gamble succeeded. Spain did not join the Axis. Gibraltar remained secure. North Africa operations proceeded. The risk had been acceptable. March Phillips continued raiding. In September 1942, he led an operation against German installations on the Channel Islands. The mission went wrong. March Phillips was killed in action. He was 32. Appleyard assumed command of the small-scale raiding force. He continued operations until July 1943 when his aircraft was shot down over the Mediterranean. He was 27. Hayes was captured in France in 1943 while supporting resistance operations. He was executed by the Gestapo in 1944. Of the core leadership of Operation Postmaster, only Lassen survived into 1945. He died leading an assault in Italy in April 1945, 1 month before Germany surrendered. The small-scale raiding force was disbanded in October 1942 after March Phillips's death. The surviving members were reassigned to other commando units. The unit's record remained classified for decades. Only in the 1980s did details emerge. Even then, full disclosure was limited. Some aspects remain classified today. Maid Honor, the trawler that brought March Phillips to West Africa, was abandoned at Lagos. She was eventually sold to the Sierra Leone government. Her fate after the war is unknown. She likely was scrapped. The tugs Vulcan and Nuneaton returned to civilian service. They operated as harbor tugs for years. Both were eventually scrapped. Today, Operation Postmaster is remembered as one of the most audacious special operations of World War II. The mission inspired fictional accounts. Ian Fleming, who worked as liaison between naval intelligence, the Admiralty, and SOE during the operation's planning, drew inspiration from it. Elements appear in James Bond novels: the daring raid, the deniability, the willingness to violate international norms to achieve objectives. These became Bond themes. In 2024, director Guy Ritchie released The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, loosely based on Operation Postmaster. The film dramatized events, changed details, added action sequences, but the core remained. British commandos stole Axis ships from a neutral harbor. They succeeded through planning, deception, and audacity. The film brought renewed attention to an operation most people had never heard of. The ethical questions remain unresolved. Was Operation Postmaster justified? Britain violated Spanish neutrality. Spain was a sovereign nation. The harbor was Spanish territory. Seizing ships there was piracy under international law. Britain knew this. Churchill approved anyway. The calculation was simple. The intelligence threat from Duchessa d'Aosta justified the risk. The cargo justified the operation. The psychological impact justified violating international norms. Spain could have joined the Axis in response. Hitler wanted Spanish entry. Gibraltar would have been besieged. North Africa operations would have been complicated. Mediterranean strategy would have required revision. But Spain did not join the Axis. General Francisco Franco valued neutrality. He had no desire to enter another war. His country was recovering from civil war. Spanish entry into World War II would have destroyed what remained. Franco protested British piracy, but he took no action. He could not prove British involvement. He had no evidence. The operation had been deniable. From a military perspective, Operation Postmaster succeeded completely. The objectives were achieved. 3 Axis ships captured. Intelligence threat eliminated. Cargo seized. No British casualties. Deniability maintained. Strategic complications avoided. The operation cost minimal resources and produced significant returns. By any measure, it was successful. From a legal perspective, the operation was indefensible. Britain violated Spanish sovereignty, committed piracy, endangered diplomatic relations, established precedent for lawless behavior. These violations were deliberate, calculated, and approved at the highest levels. Churchill knew the risks. He accepted them. In total var, international law becomes optional. Operations that advance the war effort are justified regardless of legality. This was the calculation. The lesson of Operation Postmaster is uncomfortable. Sometimes winning requires breaking rules. Sometimes objectives justify methods that would be unacceptable in peacetime. Sometimes deniability matters more than honesty. These are not pleasant truths, but they are truths. World War II was total war. Britain faced existential threat. Conventional approaches were insufficient. Unconventional warfare became necessary. SOE was created to do what conventional forces could not. Operation Postmaster exemplified this mission. At 23:15 hours on January 14, 1942, 32 men entered Santa Isabel Harbor. They stole 3 ships. They violated international law. They risked Spain joining the Axis. They succeeded because they were willing to do what others would not. They were commandos, pirates, agents of ungentlemanly warfare. They accomplished the mission. They returned home. The ships were captured. The intelligence threat was eliminated. The cargo was secured. And Britain denied everything. Plausibly, successfully, completely. No proof existed. No uniforms. No identification. No tangible evidence. The Germans knew. The Italians knew. Spain suspected. But no one could prove anything. The operation was deniable. It remained deniable. For decades, it remained classified. When details finally emerged, the participants were dead. The ships were scrapped. The island had changed hands. Fernando Po had become Bioko. part of Equatorial Guinea. Santa Isabel had been renamed Malabo. The harbor where 3 ships were stolen had become a capital city. The world had moved on, but the lesson remained. Sometimes the most important operations are the ones no one knows about. Sometimes victory requires ungentlemanly warfare. Sometimes international law must yield to military necessity. Operation Postmaster demonstrated all of this. 32 men, 3 ships, 30 minutes, 0 casualties, complete success, total deniability. That was Operation Postmaster, the neutral port heist. The mission where Commandos became pirates and Britain became a thief in the night. The operation Churchill approved, knowing it could start a war. The raid that succeeded because bold men were willing to do what had to be done and lie about it afterward. And the lie held. For 60 years, the lie held. Britain maintained innocence. No British forces violated Spanish neutrality. The story was false. Everyone knew it was false, but no one could prove it. That was the genius of Operation Postmaster. Not the stealing of ships, not the violation of neutrality, but the perfect deniability, the complete absence of proof, the ability to lie successfully to the entire world and maintain the lie for generations. That was ungentlemanly warfare. That was SOE. That was how Britain fought when fighting required breaking every rule. And it worked.